So the way I see this going, I've done some notes. I've got 5 headings. So let's try and spend about 5 minutes on each one, and see if we can get through. So Ollie asked me to speak about the Bible and money, or money. Well, it wasn't really very clear whether he wants practical advice about finance in current terms or biblical theology of money. So what I've done is a bit of a mixture. Okay. First thing I suggest is have a reserve. It's very helpful to be able to build up a reserve. So if you're just starting out in life and you haven't got much money, it'll still be very helpful to, if you can, put a little bit away week by week. Sometimes you'll need to draw on that. But if you can build up a reserve so that when bad luck comes, you've got something to fall back on. I'd like to give credit to where I got some of my ideas. A lot of this is based on something that my former pastor Eric Patterson prepared about 3 years ago. Proverbs 6 talks about go to the ant. You lazy person, go and look at the ant. And what's the one thing that the ant does? Well, it works very hard. Okay, what's the second thing that the ant does? The ant stores some of what it finds. So in the summer, the ant finds lots of food, and it doesn't work alone, of course, it works with the others, but the ants store food for the winter, for the hard times that are bound to come. And the wise person writing Proverbs says, go and look at the ants. Expect some hard times, expect some bad luck is going to hit you. If you're spending everything that comes in, you've got no reserve, nothing to fall back on, then when the bad luck comes, you're going to be stuck. You're sort of designing a life in which you're going to have a mess if you've got no reserve. You'll be trapped in poverty. If you have liquidity, that means a little bit of spare money, then that buys you time. Because when a crisis comes and you've got, suddenly you lose your job or something other happens, quite often people make a bad decision at that moment. But if you've got a bit of spare money to tide you over, you've got time to think things through, time to change where you live or how you're spending, to find the best course of action. And if you've got a reserve, then you can do things like buy larger boxes, buy bigger packets. Now, if you buy a bigger packet of marshmallows, you might just eat them all. But if you buy a bigger packet of washing powder, it'll last twice as long and it'll be much cheaper. So being able to buy the big packets is always a very helpful thing. And if you're very poor, if you've got no reserve and you're just bumping along week by week, you can't afford to buy the big packet, and life is more expensive. It's jolly expensive being poor. But there we are. If you have a reserve, you don't need to buy the extended warranties. If you get a warranty on, you buy an appliance or a radio or a phone or something, you buy that if you're going to need it. But if you could afford to get in a repairman or pay for a repair if you happen to need it, that's cheaper. Because if you buy an extended warranty, you're paying for the admin of the people who run the thing, as well as the repairs that you might or might not need. So have a reserve. You can ignore the adverts for loans, you don't pay overdraft fees, you don't pay credit card interest. And reserve can also help you maybe to be that person that helps somebody else in their moment of crisis. Maybe you find, although you were storing up a bit of money for yourself, that God has put you to be the right person at the right time to help somebody else. So that's the first bit of advice. The second one kind of flows from it, the idea of prudence, being prudent. There's a lot in Proverbs about prudence, going along with wisdom. Prudence is also in the Bible a Christian virtue. In the King James, it comes out in the first chapter of Ephesians, a verse that is translated understanding. God has poured out his Spirit, lavished on us wisdom and understanding, wisdom and prudence. What is prudence? Prudence is being awake to risks, possibilities, and taking action to meet them. And saving, perhaps saving beyond that sort of emergency reserve, building up longer term savings is one way to be prudent. If you save up for big purchases, you'll be able to buy things much better prices than the buy now and pay later. You know, if you go into these shops that have this buy now, pay later, pay it off over 1 year, over 2 years or 3 years, you end up paying half as much again in interest, kind of hidden costs. Much better if you can save. If you've got money you're saving in the bank, you don't get very much interest in the bank these days, but I've put a link in there where you can compare and look for the best rates at the moment. If you think, well, I've got enough to do a bit of saving, I've got a bit of money in deposit, but yeah, people are telling me about other kinds of investments, about shares and life assurance and this and that. I don't quite understand it, but it sounds like it's really good. It sounds like it's really good because it's really good for the person who's selling it. Always be skeptical about any other kind of product. It's probably going to do more good to the person selling it, and he will be thinking about what's best for him rather than really what's in your best interests. He'll have a distorted incentive to sell you things that might not fit. Now, another way to think and to be prudent is to think about what's the worst that could happen. What's the worst? We tend to be optimistic, or we think, look on the bright side. Look, don't worry too much. But what is the worst that could happen? There's another church have had me looking at Ecclesiastes lately, which reminds us that the worst that could happen is, in fact, certain to happen sometime, which is that I'm going to die. And if you've got a family, you know sometime you're going to die, and it might happen to be soon. You never know. What's the worst that could happen? I might get snatched away, and then suddenly they've got no one providing the main income. But if you've got a thing called life insurance, then that gives them a sudden payout to help them through the crisis when you're suddenly gone. Now that's the worst that could happen. I mean, probably you won't die. Most of us, if we're young, we will live quite a bit longer. But the worst that could happen is something you can deal with in a financially prudent way by buying life insurance. And again, get plain, simple life insurance. Something called term assurance just means there's a payout if you die. People sell life insurance mixed up with buying investments or unit trusts or whatnot. Avoid all those mixed things. So mix in costs. I mean, if you want to get investments in shares and stuff, then weigh that up separately, buy that separately. Just get plain life insurance, term assurance, and shop around for it. If you've got a bit of money, you can afford some other sort of insurance. The second sort of insurance to think about is something that provides for a long-term income if you should fall ill at work. So say you've got a job, and if you get ill, you get paid, say, up to 6 weeks salary, and then after that it's half, and then there's none. There's a thing called permanent health insurance. So it's not health insurance, it doesn't pay for hospital fees, it kind of pays you the same income as if you were permanently healthy. So that's another way to be prudent, to get an income guarantee. There's all sorts of insurances you can get, but the general rule with insurance is only get insurance to pay for something that you couldn't afford. British Gas offer me a kind of insurance thing if anything goes wrong with my domestic supplies and machines and plumbing and whatnot. Well, I could probably afford to get a plumber in. And if I buy their product, they are expecting to make money on it. It's got to pay for the admin, give them a bit of profit. So overall, I don't buy that product because I could afford to get a plumber in if I need one. If you're bumping along and getting a plumber in would be really expensive for you, then, like I say, being poor is expensive. You might need to buy that product.
I think that's a really good point. No, if you don't mind me just jumping in, because I think people get stuck. My mother certainly had a number of fridge and, I don't know, washing machine, other insurance, and just, £12 a month, something like that. It's rolling on and on year after year, and it's really expensive. And actually, they're costs that just run up that you probably don't need to spend probably a lot more than you would have. These things hardly ever go wrong, well, maybe once in 10 years. But it's so easy just to have those little costs. Also with mobiles and very high costs that just roll over year after year. People don't realise they could get them much cheaper or not at all. Thanks for raising that.
Yeah. I mean, by law, if you drive a car, you have to have insurance, because if you should cause an accident to the other person, perhaps you couldn't afford to pay out what would be needed for their sake. If you own a house and you've got it mortgaged, you have to have insurance in case of fire, in case the house burns down or something like that. And if you're going overseas, it's very sensible to pay for travel insurance that will pay for medical costs if you're beyond the reach of the NHS. But generally, insurance only buy if you need it. So we'll talk about prudence and saving and insuring. Let's talk about debt. Let's talk about borrowing money. In the Bible, debt is painted as dangerous. Sometimes it may be necessary, but it's always trouble. If you're in debt, you are more exposed to trouble, because you may say, well, it's safe to borrow money. I've got income coming. I can afford to pay this off. But if something happens to pause your income, or you lose your job or whatever it is, then how are you going to pay off the debt? Then you're in deep trouble. Debt is slavery. Proverbs 22 says, the rich rule over the poor, the borrower is slave to the lender. It's a big topic, but Bible is very heavy on warnings about getting into debt. What about being on the other side? If you have money and somebody asks you, could you lend to them? Be careful with lending. It doesn't half spoil a friendship if it's a friend involved. The kind of pressures and twists of that relationship. Money really spoils human relationships, But Proverbs tell us to take security. Have it documented in writing if you lend someone. Be careful, if you're serious about getting it back, have it written down and signed, and maybe hold on to something of theirs. You think, well, I trust this person, but trust can be abused, and when money comes into a picture, money often distorts and twists and manipulates people. Money is a devious thing, So don't be trusting, especially if someone asks you, can you just guarantee a debt for me? I'll get a much better rate if you come on as a guarantor. If you just sign, so I can pay it off, but I just need you to guarantee it for me. Well, the person who's lending them the money is not confident that the person can pay it back on their own. So only sign a debt guarantee if you could afford to pay off that loan yourself. Proverbs 6, it starts off with this person getting himself in a cage. By my own words, I've put myself in a cage. I've made myself captive. And he said, free yourself. And this is one piece of financial advice, comes up over and again, very plainly in Proverbs. I've put some more Proverbs verses on there for you. So be very cautious about doing that one. If you're able to lend and you're not sure someone can pay back, just recognise that up front. Know when you're lending to someone that sometimes lending means giving, okay? It's not wrong. It's not wrong to lend to someone that you think can't pay back, but maybe better simply to give. Just be clear what you're doing. It may actually avoid that kind of strain on the friendship if you've simply given rather than bonded them as your slave to pay you back. Jesus says, if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit's that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners in order to receive back the full amount. But love your enemies, do good, and lend expecting nothing in return. And your reward will be great. You'll be sons of the Most High. Why are you sons of the Most High? Because you have the likeness of God on you. That's how God treats us. We've been thinking about the generosity of God in creation today. He himself is kind to ungrateful and evil men. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. So that's all we've got time for on debt. Next heading in these notes says help where you can. Now this is something that has been coming up just now already. Look to help other people with the money that God has given to you. Why do people work? New Testament perspective is that godly people work in order to be generous. You might remember the advice to someone who used to be a thief, who gets converted. Ephesians 4, verse 28 says, anyone who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with their own hands, that they may have something to share with those in need. Just as people have been offering stuff for the food bank today, it may be something you could help someone in need. So work, so that not only you can provide for yourself and your family, but also other people in need. This is why we work. Paul writes to Titus 3 verse 14, our people must learn to devote themselves to doing what is good in order to provide for urgent needs and not live unproductive lives, not fruitless lives. A life that just means you earn your bread and you pay for yourself. That's not fruitful. Fruit of the Spirit, we sang today, it's not a banana. It's a light-hearted song. But it reminded us what is the fruit of the Spirit. Okay. Help out where you can. That's a theme that rightly keeps on coming up. And the last point I've got time for is disrespect the God of money. Who's the God of money? I mean, money itself is an alternative God. I mentioned Ecclesiastes already. Very hard-hitting, straightforward, direct, honest book. It says this, a feast is made for laughter, wine makes life merry, and money is the answer for everything. There's an awful lot you can do with money. But just how much is money? Is money the ultimate solution? Does it solve all problems? There's a guy who became very rich called Steve Jobs, founded a well-known technology company. But in the end he had a cancer that was very hard to treat. And with all the money he had, he was able to extend his life a certain amount, but in the end, he couldn't cure that thing within him. Money is not the ultimate solution. Money can help in a lot of situations for a period of time, but in the end, don't let money be your God. God says you must have no other God before me. God will tolerate no other God alongside. Now, in Old Testament times, when people were tempted to have a little idol, a little statue, Asherah pole or whatever, to actually go and have a physical God, you could see whether there was another God or not, and it was easy, if you like, to stay away from them. People didn't find it very easy. They were often drawn into that anyway. But it's easy enough not to have that sort of God. But how can we live in making sure that we don't love money? Because we have to have money. That's the point I'm making. You don't have to have other idols in your house, but you have to have money in your pocket or in your bank account. It's how you feed yourself and provide for those who are near you. But don't let it become the master. Jesus said no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. So even though we have to have money, don't serve it. Find ways to make sure it is not slowly stealing up and grabbing your heart. Find ways to disrespect it, to laugh it off, to blow a raspberry at it. So understand, money has power, but don't give in. Be disloyal to this alternative master. If we're loyal to Jesus, that means we have to be disloyal to all the other gods of this world. All the things that are fashionable in the culture, the things that the politicians would have us commit ourselves to. Blow a raspberry to all of those and blow a raspberry to money. Be disloyal. Jesus told a very strange parable where someone dishonest gets commended. Look it up in Luke 16 if you don't remember the one I'm talking about. This man's a cheat and he gets sacked, and before he's out the door he rings up his boss's creditors and he says, how much do you owe him? So I'll sign it off for less than that. And he's using his position to make friends. He's using what power he has over money, somebody else's money this time, to make friends for himself. Jesus says do that. Use money to make friends. To make friends in this life so that you'll be welcomed eternally. So waste money. Waste money on friendships. Waste money on kindness. Disrespect the God of money. Don't let it seize power. It's something very liberating and freeing and refreshing to your soul to be generous to somebody else. I'll just finish with a verse from Hebrews. Hebrews 13, final chapter. It says, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you had, with what you have. Because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. If we really trust in God, then money can't get a hold. If money has a hold, it may mean that you're not really trusting God. You're trusting God a bit, or you say you trust God, but actually, no, money is the thing I really count on. Keep your lives free from the love of money. That's gone fairly fast. I hope that's been helpful. We could look into any of those aspects more, perhaps another time.
Any thoughts, your own practical, your own personal struggles or hopes and fears?
I was going to ask, where does business fit in? Because it's very different than managing your own personal finances.
Right. Okay. What sort of business dilemmas we?
Sole traders and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'm just wondering what do we? I suppose I'm a sole trader. There's, I think it's in Psalms, talks about the person who is who keeps his promise even to his own disadvantage. So God really values honesty, and I mean the picture of God. Like I haven't had time to look into some of the other Proverbs passages, but it talks about that basically the general principle, the way things work, is that if we work hard and honestly, then God looks after us. Is obviously some people get pass through hard times, but the general pattern is that's how life is. That's how God has set it up, and God commends business. God commends people taking the initiative. Another bit in Ecclesiastes talks about having a side hustle. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Yeah, try this in the morning and that in the evening. If one, you don't know which one's going to fail or whether they'll both succeed to the same extent. You don't know. It's in the hand of God. Just some quick insights off the top of my head. I hope that's worth something.
A shrewd approach in some ways. Yes. He's our treasurer, by the way.
Okay. Yeah. But do weigh up in all kinds of situations. What's the worst that could happen? Think through the risks. No matter if they're likely or not, what's the worst that could happen that could really sink you? Do something about that.
Thanks, Noel. Any other Ruth? Yeah. Ruth.
I think sometimes we get pressured from, like young people get pressured with fashion and keeping up with their mates. Older folk get pressured with having a better car or a bigger home or whatever. And I think there's quite a bit in the Bible about being contented with what you have, and being willing to share what you have as well. There's a balance to be made, I think, between having something that maybe is like a good piece of furniture and you pay some good money for it, and other things you can maybe because it'll last, and other things you just go for something that'll be temporary, and then because maybe you'll want a different style or different something else later on. So I think it's but I think we should. I think money is the thing where it comes out, but a lot of the stuff that guides us in our spending is outside pressures and what other people think of us.
Yes.
And we need to take that into account too, and look for God's commendation, not the world's.
Yeah. So let's not be what the Bible calls man pleasers, looking to do what other people are impressed with, but look to please God, rather than being driven by other people's expectations. There was the BBC News website had a thing about a woman who in the end needed to get massive help from Christians Against Poverty because she got herself so much into debt. And part of the thing was living up to expectations, about having to get her kids quite big birthday presents. Well, not just presents, but throwing a party, spending hundreds of pounds. And then she said, look, I just had to do it. I couldn't let them not have what the others are getting. And it led her into great foolishness, and she ended up a big prisoner of debt. But thank God she was able to be helped out of that in the end.
I've just been handed Malachi 3. Malachi 3. Opening the floodgates of heaven passage. Bring about tithes and offerings. I was going to say, perhaps you could say something about tithes and offerings and New Testament principles for giving.
Right.
See if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be enough room to store it. So
I deliberately didn't bring that in because some churches, they're always after your money. New Testament expectation is that Christians will be helpful. Will be helpful to the poor, and certainly they'll provide for the needs of pastors and help to contribute to the church. I think it's good to be in the habit of putting something in. If you're at a stage of life where you haven't got much of a surplus, don't feel compelled to put in 10%, I would say, even though it's an Old Testament pattern. Maybe, as a sort of life goal, that's a kind of minimum thing. You should think, over the course of my life, I'll try and put in that much. But at the moment, I'm in debt. I've got credit card interest to pay. Get yourself out of that kind of expensive debt as a priority. There may be other times when you can afford to put in much more than 10%. And for those stages of life, then God will, I'm sure, bless you for doing that.
That's really helpful, thanks. I'd just add to that, I made a very important New Testament principle that you give freely and you don't feel under pressure to give, which is more or less what you've just said. So that might mean you can't give at all right now. That's okay. Or maybe that you give, and 10% is an old covenant stipulation, not really in the New Testament.
Absolutely.
There's no stipulation. What it says is give cheerfully and freely, whatever you can give. So there's no obligation, there's no compulsion. So that's just what you said, to be honest.
Yeah.
Just nailing that down. Sorry. Yes.
That was as well in those days about keeping paying for the priests and Levites who hadn't inherited any land of their own. So that's how that kind of was put in motion. But there were other, if you actually look in Deuteronomy, there's different tithes. And there's one that you can take with you and spend it on yourself for the festival. So you need to read those things and use some wisdom. But I also think sometimes, especially if you find yourself in a church that you have questions about, I'm not looking at Ollie at all. Can't see him. But I think sometimes if you're having problems of that sort, or you may have a family member or a friend that you feel you're needing to support them, and you can count that as where you're putting your money for the moment.
Amen.
So I just, or maybe give it into a charity rather than some.
Yeah, very much. In case anyone couldn't hear that, you may have a family or friend that you have to give to at the moment. See that as you're giving before God. Absolutely. It may be you do that instead of, rather than as well as giving to church for a period of life. One more thing I would say.
There's definitely a couple more hands. So you've got
Okay.
also Cheryl as well.
It was on the last, not the fifth paragraph, where it says, understand the power of money, but do not succumb. In Revelation 13, the power to rule over buying and selling belongs to the beast. Could you please explain?
Well, just an illustration. I mean, some people think money is just neutral, but Revelation depicts money as one of the tools, one of the sources of authority that the evil powers of this age have over people's life and hearts. We could. Well, that's all I'll say on that. Thank you.
Is the concept of interest biblical? I've always struggled with that, to understand that.
Right.
If it's within...
Right. Deuteronomy says you can lend to each other within the fellowship of God's people, but don't charge each other interest. If you lend to a foreigner, that's fine, charge them interest. That was what it says in Deuteronomy. I mean, it's just built into modern life. We can't avoid it. I don't feel guilty at taking interest on my deposit account, or worry about doing something wrong if I have to pay interest on a mortgage. But it's not great. Nehemiah really had a go at the well-off people who were extorting big interest from their fellow Jews at the time of when the community is meant to be pulling together to re-establish and rebuild Jerusalem. He said, what are you doing, taking advantage of each other? Certainly at a time like this, don't do that.
So that's not a corporate
topic.
thing, is it? That's just relationships with fellow Christians. So it would effectively be a poor thing, wouldn't it, to lend somebody money and saying, right, I'll take 10%.
Yeah.
Just a comment. Maybe more. I don't know how to use it. I thought that maybe it would be really useful if we, especially as Christians, if we're teaching each other how to save money or to go that money further. And sometimes it doesn't mean that you can't buy a better thing or like trainers or whatever, but how to do it in a really clever way. Or for example, I remember Liz once told me, if you sign up for John Lewis membership, you get free coffee and cake sometimes, which was amazing. Well, that was, because I didn't know that, so I signed up, and then once in a while you get this free cake and a coffee, which was amazing, because otherwise I wouldn't go to that place to eat. Or then if you sign up for Waitrose membership before COVID, you could get free coffee if you buy. It's coming. Oh.
Okay. Yeah.
So and I thought we need each other to say these tips, because we don't know. Or like, let's say my daughter, like Rebecca, she's 23. She goes to shops to try trainers or Ugg boots that she likes, then looks for them on eBay or Vinted and buys them for £20 instead of paying 120. So I thought, then you have nice pair of really well-made boots for like fraction of the price. So I thought if we could share all that sort of wisdom, how to get good things and free or whatever, because let's say I don't know everything, but collectively we can teach each other and then sort of benefit each other like that.
Yeah, I like having...
That's the sort of thing that Martin Lewis, money saving expert. Speaking out, yes, money saving expert Martin Lewis, many of you will know about him. He'll give you advice like that. And I think particularly with things like mobile rates, what are they called, monthly, what do you pay monthly? People get stuck, don't they, on 30, 40 pounds. They don't realise that if they just gave, and it's not easy for everybody to do this, but just give your provider a call. I pay £5 a month for my mobile, all calls, all 15 gig of data, something like that. So much more than I need. It's possible to get that bill down under £10 as long as you don't keep needing to upgrade the phone. If you can resist that temptation, just live with the phone. You can get a much cheaper rate. Also, something like Sky TV, I think. Sky, that's good, isn't it? Yes. But I was thinking about maybe Sky TV. They can be very high rates, can't they? And people just kind of get stuck. They don't sort of realise that they're paying the same rate over and over again. So they just they get stuck in that. Or British Gas keeps them on the same tariff. I mean, this is less relevant these days in our time because of the present crisis. But there are things that just they just go on, don't they? And people don't realise the costs they're racking up with month by month. Yeah, you can.
If you're a long-term customer, you can negotiate have a real assessment.
Yes.
Have a lower rate.
Just give them a call.
You need to be willing to negotiate.
If you're a loyal customer, they'll bend over backwards to give you a better deal. But sometimes you might need help with that, and perhaps we can help you with that too.
Yeah, that was the last thing I was going to say. Just talk about money. If you've got a problem, talk about it. If you've got a problem paying your gas bill, then talk to a gas company. You can actually get help straight from the person's, from the companies. But also, if you're getting into debt or you have some kind of crisis or you're a fear of something, speak to one another. There is wisdom, there is love within the house of God. Lord Jesus, we pledge our loyalty afresh to you. We say, we shall not have any other God. Save us, Lord, from the deceptive power of money stealing in and getting its fingers wrapped around us. Lord, let us be free. Let us enjoy Christian generosity. Let us look to please you rather than to be shaped by whatever anybody else thinks. Lead us, Lord. We do pray for one another, recognizing there may be some here who are in more need than others. We ask, Lord, help us all to have somewhere good to live, that we may not be worried when we go to sleep about what we're going to wear or eat the next day. Provide for each other, we pray. And we thank you for the work of the food bank. We pray you'd continue to provide for all that's done there. Lord, lead us in loving you and using money to serve you for your honour and glory. Amen.